Another issue which has come out in the last 2 hours, especially here on Midday View, but we are generally aware of, is about school dropout rates. And it's expected these could surge in years to come if urgent interventions are not put in place. Education and literacy experts say much needs to be done to recover lost learning time. The experts say literacy rates, for example, are already plunging. They are warning that pandemic-related closures of early childhood development centres across South Africa and the continuing financial hardships could take their call on learner literacy. Well, to look at interventions that might be needed to address this, I'm joined now by Africa Centre for Scholarship Director at the University of Stellenbosch, Professor Sarah Howie. Prof, good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday View. Thank you very much for your time. It looks like the education sector, I mean, every time it's plunging from one crisis to another. The pandemic has exacerbated the situation. Literacy rates plunging even deeper with learning time lost. It's not going to get any easier to address our levels of literacy.
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. Certainly, the COVID pandemic has definitely put terrible pressure on the system at all levels. And if we look at what is happening currently around the world, we know on average that internationally 79 days a year have been lost internationally. Now, in the South African school year, to put that into perspective, we have about 200 days a year that we spend at school. So you can imagine if you lose almost 50% of your time that should be at school. This is devastating, and it's also devastating not only at the school level but also at the adult learning level as well, and that is where we're also particularly concerned right now, looking at literacy levels. We've seen a dip, I think, in the last years. I think since about 2019 we've seen it dip down from 94% back to 87%, and with the current trajectory and the recent GETC examinations, where very low performances were obviously found after the 2020 year that we've had, and now back in 2021, we can expect those rates to decline further, both for the adults, but also, of course, we're very concerned about the younger children as well. So combined outlook is not good at the moment.
Yeah, I was speaking to the MEC for Education in Gauteng earlier here on the Midday View on eNCA, and in terms of the learning time that's been lost, he was talking about since last year, it accumulates about 5 years, and we're facing a catastrophe. That was his word. And when you don't have bums on the seats in the classrooms, like we've not had, then we have a problem where children are not exposed to reading, and reading is very important as That's one right. aspect of literacy.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's all our concern. We know that from the previous progress in international reading literacy studies that I led for 10 years, we know that from those studies at the level of grade 6, children were already 4 years behind. So if you take the current situation where children have been further deprived of nearly a year at school, this is really a concern, and it takes all hands on deck to try and at least stabilize the situation. Prior to this, we were looking at some improvements in the system. There were positive indications prior to 2020, and it is very worrying indeed across all levels of education. There are really requirements that extraordinary efforts are required to stabilize the situation.
Yeah, and I mean, access to books is another issue. Libraries are needed and stuff like that, and some children in the middle class families can access maybe the reading material via online, but we've seen how the majority of South African children have not been able to do so. So in your view, from your research and from what you know now, I mean, we're facing a devastating situation. You've said so yourself. How could we begin at least to stop the slide into the decline, rather, the levels of literacy at this stage?
Thank you, Dan, for that question. I think that one of the things we seriously have to look at is widening the access to resources, because we know currently that schools are overwhelmed. Children are not actually in school full time yet in many parts of the country, and that's another concern. So those children who are at home, those parents who are not well equipped. We also know, for instance, from previous research, that less than 50% of the households in the country have more than 10 books in the home. So we know that the resources at home are very limited. We know that libraries themselves are not widespread. We do have some mobile libraries that move around the country, but we need more initiatives like that. And we also need to look at this issue of tax on books. Why would we tax children's books, for instance? So I would make an appeal right through communities to start allowing and loosening these strangleholds and widening the access to resources right across different levels of our society. The gap between our children at home who don't have resources at home and those who have access to, for instance, online learning, this gap has doubled at least during this lockdown period. There's always been inequality, but what the COVID pandemic has done is drastically increase that inequality. And that's, I think, what all education stakeholders are asking for. Let's join hands and really try to widen the access and broaden the access to resources and support the teaching fraternity as well.
Yeah, that's going to be important as we conclude here, Prof, because, I mean, under the COVID-19 lockdown, many children ending up at home. And, of course, we're talking about literacy levels here in the language English, which most children are taught in nowadays. And you might find that some of the parents at home are not literate in English. So the pressure on literacy levels in many homes is huge. Thank you very much, Prof. Sarah Howie, for your time here on the Midday View. Still ahead.